Welcome to the Latin MedTech Leaders Podcast, a conversation with leaders who have succeeded or plan to succeed in Latin America. Please subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, etc. Today, our guest is Christian Suojanen. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Christian, CEO of Broadreach Global, LLC. Christian is an entrepreneur with 20 years of international experience in the biopharma and health sectors. So, Christian, it's great to have you here today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Julio. Yeah, and my name is complicated. In Finnish, it would be Suojanen, but in English, we pretend there's no U and say Sojanen. And in Spanish, it tends to get pronounced pretty consistently as Suojanen. And, I'm
Okay.
okay with that because every Spanish speaking country I go to, it's the same. So at least I know they're talking about me, which is not always the case in an English speaking country. Um, so we get many pronunciations in English.
All
So
right.
thank you,
Good point.
Julio. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I've known you quite a while now, and Latin America, I think, is a very interesting market internationally. I think the listeners or viewers should know my background maybe is a little bit
Sure.
different. I'm not in the medical devices space so much, more in biotechnology, biopharma, drug development, and then digital health and AI. But that being said, I think there are a lot of opportunities with regard to doing business in Latin America and internationally. So I don't know if you had specific questions or you just want me to
Yes.
share some thoughts.
Let's get started with the first question I usually ask my guest, Christian, is your journey. How is it that you got involved? You're from Canada, you live in the United States, and somehow you got involved on a personal and professional level with Latin America. So tell us about that journey, please.
So, yeah, actually, I'm from Boston originally, but I have a
Oh, okay.
Canadian accent because when I was young, my family was moved to, my father was transferred to Montreal, so I learned to speak English in Canada. And that accent stuck. But I've been back and forth between the US and Canada. After grad school, I went to Europe for 6 months and stayed 17 years. And I did a number of things, mostly started early on in technology, and we engaged with companies like Skype, who got their first financing with Index Ventures at a meeting we ran in London, and a few others that like Shazam, so names people would know. But very quickly, the company was asked to do some work in the biotech space, and we said no. But the founder of that company at the time asked me because different important stakeholder groups, EASDAQ, which was the European Stock Exchange at the time, now Euronext, kept coming to us with the European Commission. So the founder and CEO said, Christian, do you want to run this program they want us to do? And I said, sure. And about a year later, I was full time in biotech and life sciences, and I have been since. Uh, I did a turnaround of Europe's oldest biotech federation, so engaged on the policy side and met with more scientists and research institutes internationally, including in Latin America. We had a few projects there. But when I went back to the private sector, I did mostly my work in Europe and the US, a little bit in Asia and Australia. And at one point, I had a business partner in Madrid who I had helped out with some of her company's projects. Call me up and say, Christian, we have clients in Colombia, the University of Antioquia. We've done a consulting for them, but we think they would really benefit from engaging with you to investors and tech transfer directors and serial entrepreneurs and industry partners. So she put me in touch, and I found myself with a project in Medellin, and I really enjoyed Colombia. That was the first, business I'd done in the private sector in Latin America, and it was really early stage biotech innovation and technology transfer and partnering. I enjoyed working with the Universidad de Antioquia, but also a number of other universities and institutes from around the country were there. And then we had our partners in Chile and Brazil reaching out and asking for similar initiatives. And as I was going to speaking engagements and working on projects, we met more people and became involved in other business ventures like we've done in Europe and so forth. So that's a long answer, but it's the reality. And then, as you know, my company's based in Miami, and I'm not there right now, but I'm based in Miami as well. So it's very connected with Latin America, and Miami serves as a nice hub, sort of between Latin America, the U.S., Europe. You have direct flights to most places, so that made it convenient for me to work on those connections.
Absolutely. Well, Christian, what a journey, huh? Interesting. So let's talk about trends. What do you see happening politically, economically, socially, or epidemiologically in Latin America that are relevant to our discussion today?
So I think that's a very interesting question, and there are a lot of things. Some are just the emergence of new countries and markets, which maybe 20 years ago were less interesting in early stage biotech and medtech innovation. They were certainly interesting as markets for pharma and health tech to sell products in, right? But other than Brazil and to some extent Argentina, there was not a lot of research coming out that was turning into new drugs, new medicines, new products. I think that's shifted a lot, especially over the past decade. But including going back 20 years, some of the first products. But then we also looked in your sector, the regulatory reform and the ability to do clinical trials and to decentralize them and do them where you have not only the right clinics and centers and trained professionals, but also the right patient populations. And I know, for example, you've done some work where there are specific patient populations in Colombia that there are not anywhere else. And this is true of other countries. But I think there is an opportunity both to run trials and to approve products in Latin America. And it won't always make sense. Sometime were it not for the war in the Ukraine might be a great place for some projects, or India might, or Australia, or Canada. But some, it definitely makes sense to do in Colombia. And this is a case by case basis, or in Latin America more broadly. Um, I think another thing that people forget is there are a lot of, especially on the medical device and surgical device and technology side, there are a lot of approved assets in Europe that may be approved, say, in Spain or in France or in Portugal. And you talk to the companies, and they've been on the market for a few years. And they're trying to raise another 3 million so they can maybe get approval in Germany, which is great. But they don't realize that they might, with an approved product in Spain, be able to be on the market and selling in 4 months in Colombia uh, for a very minor investment. So I think this is an area that we're very keen to explore to identify those assets and bring them to one or more markets because they're usually not looking. Even the ones in Spain, which share the language and should be looking, they're not looking. They're looking at the big markets. And we need to focus on big markets, of course. But if you can get on two or three other markets in the meantime and build sales and revenue and a track record, that's much better than just being on one European market with sales of 500,000 or 2 million per year and spending the next several years trying to get into other large markets. So I think there's probably a more concise way to put it, but there's a massive opportunity there, and I think that's important. Um, yeah, maybe another thing is again the move to decentralized and clinical trials, and this opens up even more the ability to do things with multiple clinics, and in certain sectors where the outcomes really have to be carefully defined, and there may even be multiple outcomes in a phase two, which help you define the phase three. And I'm not a clinical trials expert by any means, but spending a bit of time and money on the strategy for preclinical and early clinical can really help improve your chances for phase three. And I think industry knows this, but the venture funded startup companies, unless they have really experienced industry and VP clinicals on board, they don't tend to look at this. They tend to look at what they can do with the funding they have now not thinking so much about how that will impact their future need for funding and path to market. So I think even if there's not a clear uh, vision that you need to do this trial in, partly in Chile or partly in Colombia, you should look at how that trial needs to be run and what are the best centers and clinics to do it with around the world. And can it be run? What is the best way to set it up and do it? And that should be your goal. So I think that's another driver. Um, but you mentioned trends, and the pandemic is, of course, a trend, right? And this is something we have a series of events. This is not our main business, but we like to bring innovation stakeholders together. And last year, we really looked at the innovation in the vaccine and therapeutic side related to COVID and other pandemics, infectious disease, and we had the people who did the work at NIAID on board with the mRNA projects. We had key stakeholders in Europe. We had people from industry, and everybody was talking about supply chains and production and biomanufacturing. Um, and we began digging into this and realized there were shocks. China was shut down for a while. In India, even not just vaccines, but even a lot of basic API and pharmaceuticals were not getting shipped out because India had its own crisis, right? So, in spite of the best goodwill in the world, they couldn't do it and they had to take care of their national market. And then all these countries having a panic about why are we getting these vaccines later than the UK or than the US? And it came down to supply and production capacity, and there are multiple questions there, right? I'm in Canada right now. Canada did not have any advanced biologicals manufacturing capacity at the time. And they appointed a friend of mine, one of the top LP investors into VC funds, to look at as co-chair of the vaccines and the biomanufacturing task force, emergency task force, right? And they worked on this and they developed it, but Canada's a member of the G7 and there was no capacity. And pretty much every member of the G7 felt they had insufficient capacity. And we look at the other, advanced economies and the middle income economies, and even some of the lower income economies. They were looking at this as a strategic need because shipping broke down, right? There was a shortage of production capacity. There were transportation problems. If I talked to the people at Pfizer, they were looking at the question of we don't have the raw materials to make the vaccines. How do we make our own or source our own raw materials when they can't be purchased? Right. So the good news is there is a revolution in advanced biomanufacturing. And this is not a space I spent a lot of attention on. But for countries, and I think a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I heard about a project in Colombia where the government was looking at manufacturing API in Colombia. And my view was go beyond that, go a little higher on the value chain. It will actually cost less. But I look at it now, and there's an opportunity to technology leapfrog, sort of the way in Africa they skipped the traditional banking infrastructure and went straight to mobile banking and telephone banking because the infrastructure wasn't there. We can do that with biomanufacturing now in many cases with turnkey solutions, small, advanced, continuous manufacturing, whether for traditional pharmaceuticals in powder, pill, or liquid form, or whether for biologicals, proteins, antibodies, peptides, vaccines, even mRNA in modular turnkey solutions that could be built, in a clean room in a hospital or a university, not a massive facility like we're used to thinking of. So the capital expenditure is a fraction of what it used to be, and the time to production is a fraction. Um, and I think a lot of countries, Latin America has such a workforce of trained biochemical engineers and so forth. So they could skill up on the advanced biomanufacturing very quickly. And there are programs that could be licensed in to train, with the best institutes in the world. And we're seeing this in the US right now. In fact, we have some of them coming to speak. But I see, instead of building a giant, biomanufacturing facility in Colombia or in Chile or in Brazil, where there are some already, by the way, there is an opportunity to say, here we're going to do vaccines, here we're going to do biologicals, and here we're going to work on, cell and gene therapy with a partner out of New Jersey or out of California or out of London, and we're going to co-develop. There is an opportunity to get the expertise and partner, and whether that's with a big CDMO or a pharma company or a growth, venture funded company that has a turnkey solution that can be up and running in 12 months, that is possible now. And my concern is a lot of the ministries of health and economy and de producción, as is many times the case in Latin America, are looking at building these big facilities when they could partner with cutting edge companies, big or small, and really target what they want to do. Is it COVID and influenza vaccines? Is it vaccines for yellow fever or other endemic um, pest, parasites or viruses? Is it advanced therapies? All of this now can be done more quickly, more cost effectively, but it's about bringing the right people together. And that's an area I'm very active in right now. And if any of your viewers want to come and engage, we have a meeting in New Jersey in July, and they're welcome to come. They'll meet all the top stakeholders driving this sector right now. And it's a non-commercial meeting, so it's very, very inexpensive. You can just put my email up and they can reach out. If they're from a Ministry of Health, we'll probably just give them a pass. You asked if I had a view. I have some views, Julio.
I love it. Yeah, that's the whole idea, to get you to talk, to get you to share your experience, your views on Latin America. And now that you mentioned your company, um, Broadreach Global, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what is it that you guys do? Can we talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So the tagline is insight, access, and engagement, and we have a couple of lines. We tend to work with either university systems, sometimes with individual universities or institutes, but more often university systems or health systems on their innovation policy and how they're going to take their research and translate that, move it towards the market, whether partnering, licensing, tech transfer, venture funding, or other. And then we go beyond that and we do some training for the stakeholders, right? So this is training, not just us. It's not just, 3 or 4 people come in, myself and a few of my colleagues, but we bring in the relevant stakeholders from world-class institutions and venture funds and industry to work with the stakeholders. So they train, but they also build relationships, which help foster business. Now we have a series of events where we try to connect stakeholders, and to be totally transparent, we try not to lose money on these, but they're not commercial events. My goal there is that we really see the cutting edge, and we are engaged with the key industry investors, startup and growth companies, and we can make connections and make things happen. And yes, there is business there for us, right? So this is not entirely altruistic, although in some cases, like I said, if a Ministry of Health wants to come, we may well invite them for free and connect them with the right people just in the course of what we want to do. Then we also do some work, not as broker dealers, but on as acting or fractional executives with companies where there is a spin out and it's looking to raise venture capital or partner. We can help in that sense, but our focus there is on a few companies at a time, really high engagement, not sending out emails for 20 different companies or something. I'm not interested in that business. So we will work and define the strategy and work with the company in a long term to build success together. That is the approach. But a lot of it is just seeing the pieces of the puzzle in the ecosystem and connecting them in a way that creates value. And that's where the first thing I started out with, we could find these projects where there are approved technologies or devices in Europe, and bring them to Latin America, you're a perfect partner there. But there are other parts of that as well. And I think that is a simple connecting the dots and putting the pieces together to create something greater. But it can also be a company that says, we want our own mRNA vaccines. And it's, okay, we can sit you down with the people that produce those, but we can also sit you down with the people that produce the alternatives, where less expensive, faster, higher yield, and more stable in a country maybe where you can't store the vaccines at minus 70 Celsius in all clinics around the country. There are some amazing vaccines out there, not just for COVID, but in for other viruses and diseases. So these are, and then we can connect them. Here are several different stakeholders you can work with. Here are the investors. Here are the potential partners. Let's define a strategy and make something happen. So it can be small scale, with one company. It can be ecosystem focused, or it can be with, say, a university or even a city that says, we have these 6 hospitals and 3 universities, and they each have their innovation office, but we want to do something where we can really build the region. And we'll look at that not as economic development going around promoting the region, but how can we work with them to take what they have and put that together in a way that the value proposition is really strong for other countries and partners externally, right? So to take a political economic development perspective and turn it into straight value added business development, where it's a rational case for the partners rather than a promotion of, we're a great region, which is probably true in many cases around the world, but it's not an effective way to generate business, usually, in my view.
Fantastic, Christian. Thank you for that explanation, and I applaud your initiative. I think is needed to have a connector like you. These events are a great way to put people together in a room and to exchange knowledge and make business happen and create newer opportunities for everybody involved.
It's and thanks, Julio. And I like it because it's fun. And one thing I didn't speak about today, but I mentioned to you previously, I'm doing quite a lot of work in the brain and neuro space, and I think there's a major opportunity with the sector accelerating both on the pharma and the med tech and the digital side. And we're working with some key stakeholder groups, but we're running a meeting just to do exactly the same thing in Lisbon in late July. So if you know any companies or universities with programs in digital health with either neuro or brain or mental health or psychiatric or behavioral health indications, this is a place where they'll be able to come and meet the global heads of neurotherapeutic area from pharma, but also the heads of digital health and AI and the tech companies working on the neuro and behavioral health side as well. So it's a really mixed bag, but I find when you involve the different stakeholders in a multidisciplinary cross stakeholder engagement, interesting things happen, especially if it's 200 or 300 people where everybody there can meet every speaker and expert and really develop business. So that's what we like to do. And, I realize if somebody's working on oncology, we don't have an oncology meeting right now. We'll probably do another one next year. So it's timely and topical, but this is the approach we like to take, partly because I enjoy it, but also because I've seen the power that this approach can have. And I'm looking forward to doing another meeting like this in Latin America sometime. So maybe we'll find one together.
You did one a few years ago, right? You invited
I,
me. I remember. I think it was in Medellin.
yeah, we did one in Medellin and one in Santiago in Chile.
Santiago,
And
Chile.
I mean, if you go back over a decade, I've been to some other ones, but the ones where we've run with this format, Medellin and Chile, and it was a lot of fun. It was a nice approach, and then we can work with the companies, and even informally, if we can't work with them, we can give them guidance on, okay, they want to go to Texas. Maybe it's the right decision, but maybe this company should go to Miami, or maybe it should go to London, depending on who their market and their customers are and what they want to develop. So I think this sort of conversation with the right stakeholders and experts and industry partners can really accelerate the development and the path to market for a lot of companies. So this is why
Very
we
good.
like to do this.
Very good. So, Christian, we're close to the end of the show, but what do you think about people in Latin America? What do you think about the way people do business? What do you think about the culture? What's your
So,
level of interest in going back to Latin America and traveling around the region?
so I like it, and I'm looking forward to going back. But I'll say every region of the world has its pros and cons, right, in terms of doing business. And what I like in Latin America, similar to what I like in France or Spain or Portugal or Belgium or a number of other countries, is there's a human factor. If people are going to do business, they want to get to know you a little bit, and you take time for a lunch or a dinner and a glass of wine. And personally, I like this. I can do business in the U.S. I'm American, and sometimes you do that, but sometimes it's very fast, and everything moves and it's intense. Also, London and the UK and Germany can be like that, very efficient. But sometimes you miss out a little bit. Sometimes in Latin America, some partners are extremely efficient, others are less so. So it's not just country by country, but organization by organization. And I think that's everywhere in the world. But by and large, I like it. And as you know, hablo español, hago errores muy básico, pero lo hablo. Entonces, para mí es un placer practicar y charlar un poco. I can't say the same about Portuguese if I go to Brazil, but the nice thing there is the Brazilians that you do business with all speak English, and everybody else seems to speak a level of what they call portuñol, as I'm sure you're
Portugal,
familiar
yes.
with, which they make easily understandable for Spanish speakers. So I really enjoy that. Yeah, and I'm keen to go back. So if there's an opportunity, even if it's just something collaborative, if my schedule allows, I'm happy to support these initiatives. To go and speak at a meeting and to look at how to do business down the road. I've missed travel. I had 3 months in Europe last fall. I'll be back after I head back to the US. I'll then be in Europe again in the summer. But if I can find a good reason to go to Latin America this fall, I'll be there for sure. So
Excellent.
let's stay in touch
Excellent.
about that.
I love that. All right. So before we sign off for today, the last question I usually ask my guests is if you had the CEO of a biopharma, pharmaceutical, medical device company in front of you, what would be your final words of wisdom to him or her about Latin America?
Um, so I think it would depend on the stage of the company. If it was a growth company, let's say in digital health or medical devices, and let's say they're in Europe, I would say target your first market in Europe, which is probably the market they're in, and then immediately look if that's a reference market, can we then accelerate bringing that into launching in a new market in Latin America through registration rather than full regulatory review, and do that with people who know how to do it. Don't try to do it. Imagine somebody coming from outside your country and trying to deal with government paperwork for the first time, whether you're in Germany or Poland or Spain. It's the same thing. If you go to Latin America or you go to the US or you go to Australia, somebody needs to know the process and the people and the paperwork, and then the partners and how to do business. But this is not expensive if you do it right. Now, if you're a later stage company, I would say when you're doing your licensing deals in drugs, if you have companies that are negotiating and they want global access and you'd like a little more, maybe you can carve out some of the interesting Latin American markets and then go and license those separately and build back a little bit of the premium you were hoping to get by having multiple deals rather than just one global deal with a company that probably isn't going to really resource it in Latin America anyway, unless it's one of the big pharma and they have the capacities. But I would always think about looking at the market, targeting which markets in Latin America to go to first, and then developing a plan to enter those and not neglecting it, because the tradition in Europe is to look our market, then the biggest European markets, then maybe the US. And on the face of this, it makes a lot of sense. And for drug development, it's probably rational. But in medical devices, medical technologies, digital health, it probably is not the best way forward. It may be sometimes, but generally it probably is not. And I would say Latin America should factor into that strategy. Um, Build it in. And if you can't build it in yourself, build it in with a partner.
Beautiful. Excellent, Christian. Great words of wisdom. Thank you so much for being in the show today. It's been an enjoyable conversation. I look forward to keeping in touch.
Likewise, Julio. Hope to see you again soon. And thanks for the invitation.
Sure.
All right. Bye bye.